Hello and welcome back to the 101 Fantasy Football Show on YouTube. My name is Sawyer and I am your host. I'm pretty excited for today's episode. We're going to be talking Dynasty rookies again. It feels like forever since episode 1 when I went through my top 7 rookies. If you haven't checked that out, you can find that on the YouTube channel. So the top 7 guys we went through there. We went through the big 5 running backs, or as I like to call it, the big 4 plus 1. So Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Jonathan Taylor, J.K. Dobbins, DeAndre Swift, and then Cam Akers as well. We broke all of them down on that episode, as well as the big 2 receivers, the top 2 guys in my rankings, and for the most part, the consensus top 2 in CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy. So that was a fun episode. Last week, we were going to continue from there and go through players 8 through 18. But if you tuned into last week's episode, I had my own Dynasty rookie draft this weekend, one that's very important to me, one that's a team that's pretty special to me. So I decided I'd hold off with this episode for 1 week. And so now here we are just after the draft for me. So I'll be able to give some input on how my draft went, some of the guys that I picked and my thoughts. But now we can kind of break down all these players who are in tiers 3 and 4, players 8 through 18, kind of the guys you're going to be getting that'll be the best value picks in your draft, honestly. This is where the draft gets interesting. For the most part, the top end isn't too many surprising picks, but this is where things can get really funky, really wonky, and you may be stealing value into the second round, even to the late second round of your rookie draft. So super fun episode. Just before we jump into the players, I just want to say thank you for stopping in. If you have any comments, opinions, questions, feel free to drop them down below in the comments section, or you can find me on Twitter at Sawyer_FF. All right, without further ado then, let's jump into my rookie rankings.
Hey guys, this is me now in post going through editing, and I just realized that with this episode being as long as it was, I think it ended up being about an hour and 20 minutes, I just felt like there was a natural break in the middle of it between the 2 tiers, so I'm going to post 2 videos with the content. They're both going to be posted on the same day. Just what you're going to hear is you're going to hear me talking as if I'm doing it all at once. However, when you're going to see it uploaded, it's going to be split into 2 parts. That's why, just for the sake of, for you guys having 2 videos, one that's 45 minutes, one that's probably 35 minutes, instead of having just a marathon episode with an hour and 20 minutes of content altogether. So that's all, and let's get back to the show.
All right, so we're going to kick it off today with my tier number 3. This tier is 6 wide receivers for me, no running backs, no quarterbacks. Some of you may be surprised. I know there's a lot of Keyshawn Vaughn truthers out there that would be looking for him right about now, but he's actually in my 4th tier. So for this tier, it'll just be some receivers, and I find this receiver group to be especially talented, but also super hard to differentiate all the way from 8 through 13. So when it comes to this group, I really do think it's about your style of receiver that you like. I'll be honest, like I'm a type of person who likes guys who can run routes and guys who can separate really well. But some people will be into the big athletic wide receivers, the guys who can kind of go up and get it, be red zone threats. Those type of guys might be more like Denzel Mims and Michael Pittman. You might be into some of the small, speedier guys who can create a lot with the ball in their hands, but for the most part also are used on those deep routes and kind of more gadget plays. So that might be Reagor and Ruggs. And then some of you might be more on the safe side. You might like Justin Jefferson, a guy who's kind of a big slot. Maybe his upside's capped, but he's got some good routes in the slot, and he could be one of the safest picks in this draft. Or maybe it's T. Higgins, the type of guy that you like, a guy that's more of an all-around big man, not as strong to be the guy to go up and get everything, but pretty decent routes, pretty like good amount of nuance to his game, got some size, got some red zone threat, got some decent route running over the middle and stuff like that. Kind of an all-around guy like that. So we'll break down those types of guys, couple different guys, kind of pick your flavor, what you like in your drafts, but hopefully I can give you enough information on each of these players that you feel like you can go away and figure out which guys are the guys that are more your type of receiver. So with that said, let's jump into my number 1 guy. All right, so my top guy in this tier, number 8 overall in my Dynasty rookie rankings, is Jalen Reagor. I am a huge Reagor fan. I've been a fan of him as I've watched tape throughout the whole process. I've got him as my wide receiver 3 pretty much the whole way. Right after the draft happened, I got pretty excited about the landing spot. I bumped him ahead of CeeDee Lamb for a moment. Then I came to my senses that night after round 1, put him back to number 3. But since then, I haven't really been able to find a reason to bump him down. So yeah, let's break him down. Pretty excited about this player. So overall, as a talent, I think he's a very dynamic playmaker. He's got elite speed and quickness. I know he didn't necessarily show it at the combine, but a team asked him to do a virtual workout. He showed it there, running a 4.2. Not exactly sure what it was to a T, but yeah, 4.2 speed there. And you will put the tape on. He looks fast. He's got great quickness, lateral agility, not just the long speed that he has, and overall just a great athlete on the field. On top of that, I think so he's similar to Ruggs in that sense, but I think he's a better route runner. I think he's got some actual nuance in his routes. He can set up defenders well, especially on the verts routes. He's actually very good with his deep route running, at finding a way to set up the defender, get the defender turning the wrong way before he burns him on the outside or inside. So yeah, he's got some good sense in his vertical routes as well as some of his underneath route running. And then he's also got great vertical leaping ability. He showed that at the combine. You throw the tape on, he makes some great high point catches. So he's got some good ball skills in the air. He can go up and get it. He's not going to win a ton of contested catches because, the bigger corners can outmuscle him, but you give him a chance to go up and get it, and he still can grab those, which isn't something you're expecting from someone of his stature. So just another boost that he can bring to the table there. One of the quotes I wrote actually right before the draft, or when I was going through his tape study, I wrote he would excel in a vertical passing game as a Z receiver with a creative coach. So he lands with Philadelphia in the first round, and I think naturally this is an ideal fit. Philly wants to have a vertical game, and I think he's going to be able to have a chance to slot in for a Z receiver type of role. Doug Peterson also, I think, a creative coach. He comes from the Andy Reid coaching tree. He's a disciple of Andy Reid. And something that excites me about that is, for him, he's just watched Andy Reid go win a Super Bowl with Tyreek Hill being one of the biggest weapons in that offense. Now he goes and gets himself a player like Reagor. I think if anyone in this class turns out to be like Tyreek Hill, I don't think it's Henry Ruggs. I think it's going to be Jalen Reagor in a similar type of role in Philadelphia. I think he's got some of the talent there. I think a lot of people love Tyreek Hill's speed, but one of the most special things about Hill is actually his agility and his ability to make moves and set up plays on the deep route. So obviously the speed's there, and Jalen Reagor does have some great speed, but it's the agility and the way he moves that is just absolutely special. So I think that's super exciting in the offense. And so because of all that, I do think Jalen Reagor has some of the greatest upside in this entire class. When it comes to the first season, however, I don't think his first season is going to be anything special. Alshon Jeffrey is going to still be at the X receiver role. They've got J.J. Arcega-Whiteside still. He's coming into his second season. I don't think he's just going to go away. I did hear some reports. Him as well as the coaching staff were saying last year he was battling through a lot of injuries. So he was a second-round pick last year. I don't think they're just going to give up on him yet. I think he's just going to remain the heir to the throne at the X receiver role, which I think is still good for Reagor because I don't think Reagor really is an X receiver at all. I think he's a Z player. Ertz and Goddard are still going to be on the team as tight ends, and they might still encourage just the fact that they have them both. It'll encourage the team to use some double tight end sets, which won't necessarily help Reagor for now. But for the most part, Jalen Reagor is going to be competing for that Z role. So obviously the team did go out and get Marquise Goodwin, who is going to be a Z role type of player. They do have Deshaun Jackson, also a Z role type of player. So in the first year, it's going to be tough for Reagor to see the field if Deshaun Jackson and Goodwin both stay with the team, and if they are both healthy. I think there's a decent chance here that one of them doesn't stay with the team through camp, and there's obviously also a good chance that one of these guys get injured. They don't have very good bills of health, either one of them. So there is a chance that Reagor ends up stepping into the starting role in that position at some point throughout the season, but I think there will be some battle for targets. I think Greg Ward has a chance even to see some slot duty. I don't think Reagor really has – he can move inside, but he didn't run a lot from the inside in college, so I think they're going to want to keep him towards the outside in more of a Z role. So, yeah, I think for the most part he's going to be battling Jackson and Goodwin, and I think that could limit him this season. I think they're good players to learn from for sure. D-Jax has been one of the best in his deep passing game, one of the best deep passing receivers in the game for a while. So, there's a lot he can probably learn from Djax, but in the first season, I think he's only going to really see action in some 3 wide receiver sets, and if people get injured, then he might get a chance to see some 2 wide receiver sets, but that's really depending on who's healthy, and that's a lot to be banking on for fantasy. When it comes to the team as a whole, Philadelphia does have a good quarterback at the helm, and last year they averaged 37.7 pass attempts per game, which is top 10 in passing attempts. I don't think that's going to change much this year. They didn't go and add a bunch of running backs. Obviously, in fact, they didn't really add any. They added Mike Warren, an undrafted free agent. So I think they're going to still try to pass the ball. Miles Sanders, their main back, is very capable in the passing game. Even Boston Scott, their backup, very capable in the passing game. So I think there's going to be a passing team with over 600 targets to go around. I don't think Reagor seeds a ton of those this year, but I could see him getting 60 to 70 targets in year one, with that continuing to grow as he grows in the NFL. So, yeah, I think in the long term, that's the type of play you're looking for here with Reagor. It is crowded now, but I think there will be soon a change of the guard. Alshon Jeffrey is up there in age. I think Djax is 33, Marquise Goodwin is 29. So, that Z role, there's an opening coming up soon. I think neither of those players are on long-term deals at all. I actually know that for a fact. So, yeah, Reagor will have a chance, especially in year two, to step up and be that starting Z receiver. So I think maybe this season you're not going to see it, but down the road it might be him really as the main weapon in the passing game, with Goddard or Ertz, probably Goddard at that point manning the tight end role, and then J.J. Arcega-Whiteside potentially on the outside, or maybe if Hightower or Watkins can hit, maybe they'll be standing across from Reagor. But for the most part, I think he can be really a great weapon for this team. I don't think he can ever be like a super high volume wide receiver, but I could see 110 to 130 targets for him, and he just has the ability to create on deep routes, shallow routes, score on deep touchdowns, but also create with his run after catch to score touchdowns just created by his own athleticism. So as a whole, I expect him to become, if I had to guess, a boomer bust wide receiver 2, but he's got legit wide receiver 1 upside in a Tyreek Hill, Odell Beckham type of role. Those are lofty expectations, but I truly believe that is his upside, and his floor is probably like a weekly boomer bust wide receiver 4 or 5, kind of what you're seeing with Curtis Samuel right now, a guy who can score a touchdown or make a big play, but for the most part, he's really hard to trust weekly, and he's not going to give you great numbers in total at the end of the season. All right, so let's jump into number 9, Justin Jefferson. He's my number 2 in this tier. He's LSU wide receiver who lands with the Minnesota Vikings. And I think Justin Jefferson is a very safe prospect. Justin Jefferson has great hands. He's shown at the catch point he can make the catch. He's a handsy catcher, makes a lot of catches. Even some tough catches in tight windows, he'll make those. He's got good routes. He's able to separate from defenders pretty well. He's pretty polished in his route running. And he also has a decent athletic profile that I think surprised people who watched his tape. He went to the combine. He surprised me. It seemed like he surprised the community with how fast he ran and some of his other athletic traits. So a really good package that you like to see. Good separation, good route running, some polish, good understanding of the game, good athleticism. But I think he might not have a ton of upside as well. So definitely an interesting player, and I think probably Mr. Safe with the least risk of the bunch. But his upside in this group might also be the lowest. So, if you're looking to completely have a guy who doesn't bust out on you and give you absolutely zero value, maybe this is your type of guy. But if you're looking for a guy with upside to become a wide receiver 1, I don't know if that's Justin Jefferson either. But with that said, let's jump into, kind of what I see for him in this Minnesota offense. In his first season, I think Jefferson's going to be stepping into the wide receiver 2 role. This offense says goodbye to Stephon Diggs, and with him, 113 targets per season over the last 3 years are out the door. And so that is definitely some good opportunity for Jefferson. This team has Tajay Sharp that they brought in, and they have B.C. Johnson, who looked okay at times last year, but neither of those guys are really ready to step up and be the wide receiver 2 in this offense. And I think Justin Jefferson comes with a fairly NFL-ready skill set to become that wide receiver 2. Adam Thielen is obviously still there, and he is on contract for a few more years. This isn't the last year of his deal or anything, so I do think Thielen will continue to operate as the wide receiver 1 in this offense, but I think Jefferson's going to be able to carve out a decent role in his first season. As I said before, he's more of a slot receiver, but he did show in 2018, the year before last when he was playing in LSU, that he can play on the outside. He actually played outside for most of that season, and his numbers were 54 receptions for 875 yards and 6 touchdowns. So I know that's nothing special, but that's still capable. He's definitely still capable on the outside. And so this offense, they're probably going to be looking to move Adam Thielen inside and outside. He's been very good on the outside, but he's also been able to show a lot of ability out of the slot. And I think Justin Jefferson brings a somewhat similar skill set to Adam Thielen, so they'll be able to use these guys in a versatile way. I think most of Jefferson's production is going to come from when he's running routes out of the slot, but I do think it's going to be unique because this offense is going to have two receivers who can do similar things, and so they're going to be able to use them somewhat interchangeably, which will be good for Jefferson, and he'll actually be able to learn a lot from a player with a similar skill set in Thielen. When it comes to the offense as a whole, like I said, with Diggs out last year, there's a couple other minor pieces that leave. There's 110 vacated targets from last season, which is 25% of last year's targets that are up for grabs. So I do think there's an opportunity here for some good targets. Now the problem is that this offense only had 466 pass attempts last year, which is bottom 5 in pass attempts per game. That is problematic. You want to have players in high-powered offenses, and this is just not one of those offenses that's going to be throwing the ball a lot. Last year, I think the reason that this happened was because Gary Kubiak came in as an offensive advisor, and that's what kind of shot down the amount of passing attempts. Kubiak's definitely a run offense type of guy, and this season now he's stepping into the offensive coordinator role, so I think he's going to have even more say over what this offense looks like, and I expect it to be another run-heavy year for this offense. So, opportunities might not be there in terms of pass attempts. However, maybe the saving grace of it all is that Kirk Cousins will be under center for the foreseeable future, and he's a highly efficient quarterback on his attempts. If you look at the past 2 seasons, his 2 seasons in Minnesota, his efficiency or completion percentage was 70% and 69%, which are top 5 in completion percentage over the last 2 years. So, a quarterback who's not going to have a lot of attempts, but at least on the attempts he's going to get, the completion percentage is going to be high. They're going to be nice passes, and I think Jefferson, he's going to be able to catch a decent percentage of the balls thrown his way. If we're trying to predict exact numbers, I think, targets, they might be up to probably 500 targets total this year from 466. They do have a healthy Thielen, hopefully for the whole year. They've got Irv Smith entering his second year. Dalvin Cook can catch to the backfield, and Kyle Rudolph is still there. And so out of those 500 targets, I think it'll be hard for Jefferson to see a crazy high amount, but I do think in his year one, he's going to be getting 70 plus targets, maybe 70 to 80 targets, which could lead to Jefferson being your most productive wide receiver as a rookie this season. So pretty interesting for year one. And then the long-term outlook is something like, Thielen will probably be there and Jefferson will be developing as the number 2 wide receiver. Thielen isn't getting any younger, so I do think, over time maybe Jefferson's going to be able to carve out more of a role from Thielen. But I think in the long term they don't see Jefferson, and I personally don't see Jefferson being an alpha wide receiver on his team. I think he might just be a good secondary option. So I would expect in the long term, if Thielen starts to fall off, they're going to bring in another guy who can be another versatile weapon. And so to me, I think for some reason I just can't get this thought out of my mind. Justin Jefferson is like Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd's been very good over the past few years. He's been a top 20 fantasy option the last 2 years, but he's not a sexy option. And Tyler Boyd is never going to give you wide receiver 1 numbers. He's never going to be top 12, but he's going to be giving you weekly safe floor as a wide receiver 2. And I think if I had to predict what Jefferson's going to be, he's going to be a safe weekly wide receiver 2. And if I'm looking for his upside, I think it's funny enough that I think his upside is his teammate, Adam Thielen, someone who's a high-end wide receiver 2, but Thielen rarely is going to give you I think it was one season where he gave you wide receiver 1 numbers. And yes, maybe you could see that 1 year from Justin Jefferson, a year where he catches a lot of touchdowns. But I think maybe his upside is probably high-end wide receiver 2. I would expect maybe a low-end wide receiver 2 as his safe, like a safe floor wide receiver 2 for his career. And I think if you're looking for his floor might be only as low as like a low-end wide receiver 3 or flex play, kind of like Sterling Shepard. I do think, his route running is going to translate well. His abilities are going to translate immediately to the NFL. And so, his floor might be a Sterling Shepard, which isn't bad. So for the most part, if you're looking to draft Mr. Safe, I think you're going to want to look at Justin Jefferson. But if you're someone who's going to be trying to swing for the fences, this might not be your guy. All right, so let's jump into my number 10 ranked player, number 3 in this tier, and that is T. Higgins. I don't ever seem to find T. Higgins love on Twitter, online, in the fantasy community, but I think he's great. T. Higgins, he's 6'4", 216. He's a fairly athletic receiver, but most of all, I think the thing that draws me to Higgins is he's a good wide receiver prospect. I think a lot of the times you see players who are good athlete prospects or athletic prospects, but Higgins is a good polished wide receiver prospect, kind of the same as what I was just saying with Jefferson. Higgins has good hands. He's got good ball tracking. He's got underrated route running, and I do think he has decent rack ability that he just doesn't get any credit for. So overall, very good package as a player. He's a very solid all-around prospect. He just doesn't jump off the screen when you watch his tape, and I think that's why people are just hesitant to get super high on him. But in the draft, Cincinnati likes him, obviously. They drafted him with their first pick of the second round, which is 33rd overall, and he now immediately pairs with Joe Burrow. And I think, this is going to be the pairing that they want to head into the future with. This is going to be the number 1 wide receiver of the future. Joe Burrow is obviously going to be the quarterback at the helm of this team for hopefully a long time. And they're hoping that this pairing is going to become their new dynamic passing duo. So, in his first season, I don't think things are going to be, I'm not overly optimistic, let's say that, because I think he's going to come in as the wide receiver 3 in this offense. I think AJ Green is obviously going to maintain a role, and it's going to be Joe Burrow's first year. So you're going to want to have that veteran guy, that veteran presence who can go up and get it and make things easier for Joe Burrow. Even though I think Burrow is going to be NFL ready. I think he's a great quarterback already. They'll have AJ Green playing the number 1 role, Tyler Boyd as a slot role, which is funny because I just gave the comp of Jefferson to Boyd. So now, Joe Burrow goes from having Justin Jefferson as a weapon in his offense to now having Tyler Boyd. I think he's going to feel comfortable with Boyd as like a safety valve over the middle, and that leaves T. Higgins to slot in on the outside across from AJ Green in 3 wide receiver sets. So I think, maybe not a ton of opportunity, but at least I do think Higgins is going to be able to see the field. And there's also no guarantee that AJ Green is going to stay healthy. So a lot of people are really down on his year 1, but I think there's some decent opportunity here. Zach Taylor, his philosophy, it's based on Sean McVay. Zach Taylor comes from the LA Rams system. Last year was his first year as an offensive coordinator, and when he was in LA, they used a lot of 3 wide receiver sets, with all 3 being able to be productive. So, last year with AJ Green out, you did see it. They had John Ross, Auden Tate out there alongside Tyler Boyd, and all 3 of them were actually able to give you some decent numbers when they were all healthy. So it's definitely some opportunity here. I don't think in the long term, this year Higgins may have to compete with John Ross this year as well as Auden Tate. But Auden Tate's coming off an injury. He doesn't have crazy draft capital. I think he was a 7th rounder. I think Higgins is expected to step in ahead of him immediately. And in the long term, I don't think John Ross is going to stay around. They just declined his 5th-year option. That makes this year his last year of his deal, and I really think they're just going to let him walk after this season. So, this year there's no tight end weapons even. Tyler Eifert now leaves to go to Jacksonville. I think Higgins might be the number 3 receiving weapon in this offense in his first season. And when you look at the offense, that's actually some decent opportunity. This offense was 6th in passing attempts per game last year. I expect Zach Taylor's offense to continue to be a pass-first offense. They had 616 passing attempts total last season. I think Burrow steps in, and I think they're going to be willing to give him roughly 600 attempts again this year. I think he's ready. I think they see him as ready for the NFL, and I think they're going to let him sling the ball around. And I think that means there's going to be plenty of targets to go around. Now, I don't think Higgins is going to see a ton of those, but I could definitely see him finishing with 50 or 60, maybe even close to 70 targets, 70-plus targets if there are some injuries ahead of him. If you see AJ Green go down, T. Higgins could be even looking at like 70 or 80 targets in his rookie season. So, a decent amount of looks that might go his way this season, and then the long term is where T. Higgins really is enticing to me. AJ Green will be 32 when the year starts, with 1 year left on his contract. It could be as early as next year where AJ Green walks from the team and passes the torch along to Higgins to become the receiver in an offense led by Joe Burrow. If you're someone who is a believer in Joe Burrow and you've watched some of T. Higgins and you think, he's a decent talent, that could be an elite duo in the long term and a guy that's going to be carrying you to some fantasy championships in the future. So, I think Boyd will continue to be a complementary second piece. I think Auden Tate can develop into a third piece, but I think you could be seeing seasons for T. Higgins where he's seeing 130, 140 targets and giving you immense production. So, if I had to guess where I think T. Higgins is going to be, I would have to guess he's probably a mid to low end wide receiver 2. But I think the upside here is wide receiver 1 numbers with a couple big TD seasons like AJ Green. Maybe he's a low end wide receiver 1 where he's got 1 or 2 seasons where he had big touchdown upside that got him into the top 5. But there is some risk here, and I think the floor for T. Higgins is probably a dart throw wide receiver 4 or 5 on any week, more like a Tyrell Williams who doesn't pan out to be your alpha in an offense, but instead a guy who's just tall, lanky, has some decent speed, and can give you some production on the outside on deep balls. All right, so let's go to number 11 on my board, and that is Michael Pittman, wide receiver from USC who lands with the Indianapolis Colts. Pittman was a my guy going into the draft. I would definitely classify him as a my guy. I had him as my number 13 ranked true talent wide receiver, and for the most part consensus had him around number 18. So definitely someone I was higher on, and then he lands with the Colts at pick 34 in the NFL draft. And since that's happened, he's been skyrocketing up boards. He's now number 12 when it comes to post-draft consensus rankings, and for me, I have him at 11. I think some people might be hesitant to be drafting Pittman there because he wasn't there before the draft, but I promise you, I think Pittman is worth that value. I just traded up in my most recent draft to go get Pittman because I do believe in the talent. And I think if you look at the build, he's kind of similar to Kenny Golladay, which is super intriguing. He is a big-bodied possession wide receiver. He's got great football IQ, comes from a family of football players. Obviously, his father played in the NFL. And then he's got the ability himself. He's got the big body ability, but he can go up and get the ball. He can run good routes, and he can create off after the catch. It's a type of guy who's really got an all-around skill set to become an alpha or a true X receiver in an offense, which is really intriguing to me. When you look at the first season for Pittman, he has a chance to step in as the X receiver right away across from Hilton. You look at this offense. Last year it was Pascal. Chester Rogers got some looks in this offense. Paris Campbell and Hilton both went down with injuries, I believe, but Paris Campbell was also a rookie, so not a lot of receiving weapons in this offense. And now Pittman comes in, and I think if he can beat out Pascal, he's got a real chance at being a starter in 2 wide receiver sets and playing on the outside across from Hilton with Campbell in the slot when they get 3 guys on the field. So, real chance in year 1. I think Rivers coming in, I don't like Rivers as a quarterback anymore. I really don't think he can throw the ball with a lot of velocity anymore, can really get it exactly where he needs to get it. But Rivers has liked his big-bodied wide receiver in the past. You look at Mike Williams in LA. Mike Williams had a 1,000-yard season last season, and the year before that he had double-digit touchdowns. So, if you're going to get either one of those, 1,000 yards is a good season. Double-digit touchdowns is a good season. If you compare those, there's a lot of upside. I'm not saying I expect either of those things from Pittman in his first year, but definitely some good upside here, and definitely points that Rivers does like using his big-bodied wide receiver, which is not what he has in T.Y. Hilton. With that said, I do think this Indianapolis offense is shifting towards a run-based game. They drafted Jonathan Taylor. They have Marlon Mack, two running backs that they refer to as their 1-1 punch. They have an amazing O-line that obviously they're going to be able to run the ball behind. They were great running the ball last season. And even last season before they had Jonathan Taylor, this team was bottom 10 in passing attempts per game. I expect, with the ability to run the ball as well as I think they will be able to, with Marlon Mack and Jonathan Taylor there, I expect them to again be bottom 10 in passing attempts, which is going to limit the total targets to share. I do think Hilton will remain a decent volume wide receiver this year. Like I said, Phillip Rivers does like his big-bodied receiver, but Keenan Allen also was continually a volume wide receiver in that offense, and I think Hilton's going to be that similar type of player for Phillip Rivers, who can kind of be a safety valve wide receiver with great routes and the ability to win underneath. And so I don't think there's going to be a ton of targets to go around in his first season, even if Pittman is on the field. I think if I had to guess and pin it down, I think he's going to be somewhere near 60 to 65 targets. And so, it's good for a rookie because he's going to be seeing a lot of targets on this team. But as a whole, this offense might limit him a little bit in the first season of what his upside could be in his first year. Again, the comp to Mike Williams. In his first year, in his second year, Mike Williams only got 66 targets. And then this past season, as a third-year wide receiver, he still only got 90 targets from Phillip Rivers. So I think 65 targets is a safe guess for Pittman. But, the upside in the long term is very intriguing with this player. When we look in the long term, Hilton is older. He's turning 31 mid-season, and he's on the last year of his deal. Hilton also has trouble staying healthy. He's coming off an injury again last season. So he does want to re-sign. The news is that, Hilton wants to re-sign with the team, but there hasn't been any news from the team as to whether or not they are actually looking to extend Hilton. So, if Hilton doesn't return, Pittman should be locked in as the X receiver by year 2 and probably the number 1 receiving weapon in this offense. And even if Hilton returns, Hilton will be 32 for the following season, for Michael Pittman's second year in the NFL. And, as guys hit that 30 plateau, 30 is maybe a little bit young, but maybe 32, 33, they definitely do start to fall off, especially guys with some injury history. So there's a real chance that Pittman can become the number 1 target as soon as next year, whether or not Hilton stays. Now, the problem with that is, even if he's the number 1 target, who is going to be the quarterback after that? Phillip Rivers has already made plans for post-NFL on what he's going to be doing as a job, coaching a high school team. So there's going to be question marks. I don't think Eason's going to be ready by next year, and so you're going to have a big question mark in this offense. And I think Frank Reich's just going to say, okay, well, whoever's at the helm at quarterback, we're still just going to run the ball because we can. So there's a lot of moving parts in the long term here for Pittman, but I think the upside is there for him to become an alpha receiver. The team loves him as a player, and so there's a real chance for big upside. So if I had to make a prediction, I'm going to guess that Pittman's going to end up being a touchdown and big play wide receiver 2 or 3, probably a low-end wide receiver 2, because I don't believe in the quarterback situation being fixed in the short term. However, the upside here is Kenny Golladay, a top 10 wide receiver who can give you big touchdown upside, can be dominant in the passing game, and can be an every week player for you, with the floor probably being like a touchdown-dependent wide receiver 5, something kind of like, Devin Funchess maybe, something like that. That's just not attractive for fantasy teams. So, Pittman's got great upside. He does not have a safe floor. And you take that risk on how you feel about the Indianapolis offense. But if I had to guess, I don't think this quarterback situation is fixed. And so for me, that's why he lands where he does in my draft boards. All right, so number 12, Denzel Mims, the number 5 receiver in this tier, number 5 out of 6 total in this tier. I really like Mims as a talent. I think this player is uber talented, and the only reason why he's down here at 12 is because of situation. Before the draft, Mims was my number 10 player on my board, and that was because I thought he was an athletically gifted receiver with great ball tracking ability and hands. If you follow me on Twitter, you would have seen recently, I do think athletically, if anyone's going to become Julio Jones, he has the athletic traits to do that, and he's got great ball tracking skills. Obviously, he has tons of polish required to get to that level, but the person who has that in their range of outcomes would be Denzel Mims. But there are a lot of pros and cons, that come with this landing spot, and so you're going to need to really evaluate what you think about this landing spot before you decide whether or not you're going to be drafting Denzel Mims. So first off, I think Mims is a developmental prospect. I think out of this group, he was the one who I saw as the most raw, and so I was really hoping his landing spot would be somewhere where he'd be getting good coaching and he'd be protected by some veterans. You look at the Jets, and that's kind of the exact opposite. Adam Gase has a track record of having fantasy players who are just duds, and then as soon as Adam Gase is no longer there, they become studs. You look at Devontae Parker, Ryan Tannehill, Kenyon Drake. These guys turn into studs as soon as they leave. So it's risky. I don't trust the coaching staff to be able to develop Mims properly. And then on top of that, there are really no veterans to protect him. Like, is Brashad Perriman really going to protect him and take top coverage away? Is Jamison Crowder going to face the top corners? No, he'll be in the slot anyway. Is Josh Doxson going to go out there and take top coverage away? No, I don't think so. And so, a lot of people see that as a positive. Okay, he's going to get on the field. There's a road to targets, a path to targets. But for a raw prospect, it's definitely very risky. And I think that's the big word to remember when we talk about Mims is like huge risk, but also huge reward. I think he has a chance to achieve his potential still. And if he achieves his potential, he'll be amazing. But there's also a chance he's Corey Davis or the next Kevin White. If we look at the Jets, okay, so, the breakdown for year one, I think he's going to step in as the X receiver in this offense. I think Crowder's going to be on the inside. I think, with Herndon there and Ryan Griffin there are some tight ends who are still going to draw some targets. And Sam Darnold at the helm is an upside quarterback that I like the pairing of for the long term. Sam Darnold's only 22. Denzel Mims is also 22. So the guys are the same age. They're going to be able to grow together. But this situation is just really hard for me to get around. So, he's going to step in as the X receiver. And I think that means he's going to get about 70-ish targets in his first year. So he could be productive this year. But I'm unsure how good these targets are actually going to be and whether I believe Denzel Mims is going to actually be able to create separation when he's not a polished route runner yet or a very solid route runner yet. And he's going to be playing against the top corners potentially from these teams. He caught a bunch of touchdowns in college every single year, so there's definitely touchdown upside. But I do think in the red zone, this team just brought in Frank Gore. They have Lev Bell. They have these tight ends who've been able to catch some touchdowns. I know they are really excited about Herndon. Those guys might still limit his immediate touchdown upside. So, if I had to guess this year, I do think Mims is going to see 70-something targets as the X receiver in the offense. But I don't think he's going to be someone you're going to be able to actually bank on turning those targets into production in year one. And so for most dynasty teams, he's going to be a guy who, maybe you spot start him in an injury or bye week reason. But for the most part, he's going to be riding your bench and you're playing for the long term. In the long term, things do get a bit more interesting because I do think, yes, there's nothing stopping Denzel Mims from becoming the guy for Sam Darnold. But there's also and there's also no guarantee that Adam Gase is around for a long time. If they keep losing games, you can expect they're going to switch the coaching staff up, and as soon as that coaching staff changes, he could explode. Devontae Parker had a fifth-year breakout, something that we don't really ever see in fantasy or in the NFL, and that happened as soon as Adam Gase left the team. So, there's a chance that Adam Gase leaves after this year. This first year might be a bit of a wash, and then Denzel Mims breaks out with a great coaching staff. And so I think if you can buy Mims and sit on him and you have the patience and you believe in the upside, then this is worth it for you. If you're a risk tolerant person, I think you're looking at upside of a top 10 wide receiver who could become the next Julio Jones. But I think the floor here is a field stretcher, red zone, wide receiver 5, maybe something ironically like his teammate Brashad Perriman, who has some good athletic traits, some speed, but not someone you're going to be relying on week to week. So, those are the two extremes. I think if the middle ground would be a low-end wide receiver too, but even still, I'm not willing to say that that's my guess because I really think you're probably going to get one extreme or the other when it comes to Denzel Mims. And so, if you're willing to bet on that, this could be your guy. But for me, someone who's risk tolerant, that is why, or not very risk tolerant, that is why he is lower on my draft board. All right, so let's jump into my number 13 player, and that is Henry Ruggs. Henry Ruggs is one of the most exciting wide receiver prospects in the draft, and you're probably going to see me lower than most of the community is on Henry Ruggs. He's obviously a very fast player. That seems to be the hype. But not just that, he actually does have good ball skills and hands, which is something that's a bit different than other speedsters we've seen in the past. Now, when it comes to Ruggs, the downsides is that he does have raw route running. It's really not developed at all. He has some nice moves and cuts in and out of his breaks, but I don't think he understands the nuances to set up defenders. I haven't really seen him set up defenders a ton within his route tree yet. And that's something he'll need to develop at the next level. And the other thing is his production profile is just not there at all. I know people are going to point to say that's Alabama. They have a bunch of great wide receivers, and that's why. But to me, it's hard to say a player is going to increase their production a ton at the NFL level if it wasn't there in college. And so I'm not going to say it's a complete write-off. Henry Ruggs is obviously in this tier, and I wouldn't be knocking anyone who's taken him as high as 8. I think all 6 of these guys you could take in any order you want. However, for me, okay, so yes, his production profile wasn't there, and people are saying it could get better at the next level, but what if that's the type of player he is? A great player for his NFL offense because he opens it up for other players, but he's not a player who's ever going to demand a high volume of targets. And that's the thing that I'm seeing, and that's kind of how I feel about Henry Ruggs. Because of that, I think he's the biggest risk of all these guys to just become a guy who opens up the field and can create when he has the ball, but he's not going to ever be someone who's going to really reach that immense upside, even though he did get the draft capital of the number 1 wide receiver in the draft. If we're going to look at situation, though, let's break it down, not just the player. Let's look at kind of what happened in the draft. He lands at number 12 overall. He goes to the Las Vegas Raiders. And so in the first season, I do think he will have an immediate role. You don't go draft a player at 12 and not have a role for him. More so than that, Gruden even said, they have a role that they made for Antonio Brown, and he wants Ruggs to step in and play that role. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. I don't think Henry Ruggs is going to be able to immediately step into that role and become Antonio Brown and give you the production that people wanted Antonio Brown to get. I think that's just Gruden saying, we created plays and we created concepts where Antonio Brown was going to be able to run that role, and we're excited that we think Henry Ruggs has the capabilities to do that. But I think there's going to be targets that are going to be spread around. Tyrell Williams is never going to be a high-volume guy, but he is going to be there, and he's going to demand some targets as the veteran wide receiver. Darren Waller had over 100 targets last season, and I don't think he's going anywhere. He's a safety valve for a quarterback who likes to go to his safety valve in Derek Carr, so I do think Darren Waller is still going to get his. I think Hunter Renfrow showed last year that he deserves to have a role still. He was great in the games he played, especially towards the end. He had a good stretch towards the end of the season where he's never going to be someone who's going to be explosive and be an alpha in an offense, but he is going to demand his share of targets. And then you have the 2 rookies in Henry Ruggs, but also teammate Bryan Edwards, who I am very high on. And so, part of the reason I'm a bit lower on Ruggs might also be because I'm very high on Edwards and his potential in this offense over the next few seasons. So, if we break down the numbers, this offense is a middle-of-the-road passing offense. They've got decent QB play in Derek Carr, but low to mid 500s in targets that are going to be available in this offense. And the target hog, there's really no target hog. Darren Waller had to be necessity last year, the guy, but there isn't a target hog. But I still don't think that this year that's something Henry Ruggs is going to be able to step in and do. I think it's going to be a blend of all the players, whether it's it's going to be Tyrell, Renfrow, Ruggs, Edwards, Waller, and some of the pass catching running back weapons. So they've got Jalen Reagor still. They've brought in Lynn Bowden, who's like a running back who can play receiver and quarterback, but I don't expect that to happen. And so with that, I would expect Henry Ruggs still will get a decent amount of targets. He'll get about 60 to 70 targets. But I think in year 1, you're going to see something like Marquise Brown's rookie season. And I think now you look at where Marquise Brown's value is 1 year later, and there were guys that were able to step up and become a bit more. And I think if you're looking at who you think's the best out of that class, there are other players who, Baltimore still took Marquise Brown number 1, but that's because he's a great player for that offense, and I think that's kind of what Henry Ruggs is to Oakland. While other players were able to be more successful in their offenses because they demand a higher target volume. In the long term, I do think Ruggs will still, he'll maintain a very good role. Tyrell Williams will fade. I do think it's going to become Bryan Edwards and Henry Ruggs as the X and Z receivers. I think Waller will stay at the tight end spot with Renfrow in the slot. And I do think Ruggs has a chance to be, a very decent target in this offense. But if I had to pick his target share, I think he's going to be hovering closer to the 100 target mark than up towards the 130, 40, 50 target mark, like some of the true alpha or number one targets in their offense. So, I don't say all this to just poo-poo on the Henry Ruggs parade. I do like him. I just feel like from where I stand, obviously I have him at 13 and other people are going to have him at 8 or 9. And so if you want to hear people talk really highly of him, other people will be saying all of his upsides. And I do think, yes, he has the ability to create with the ball in his hands. He can run very good deep routes and create with his speed, which I know he didn't do a ton at college. I think he's got the capability to do that. He can turn a slant into a touchdown, an 80-yard touchdown when they're getting the ball in their own 20. He's just going to run a quick slant and be able to take it to the house. I do think those things are going to happen, and so he can be efficient on his touches. And I do think he's going to have at least 1 year in his career where he turns out a wide receiver one season because the stars are going to align and he's just going to hit. But if I had to predict what I think you're going to get when you own Henry Ruggs, is I think you're going to get a very boom-bust, fringe wide receiver 2 or 3 on a weekly basis. I think his upside, yes, he could become a top 12 receiver, but even still, I don't think it's going to be a yearly safe top 12 receiver. It's going to be a guy who, at the end of the year, you're going to look back and say, oh, yeah, he's the wide receiver 10. But you go through the games, and it's like he's going to have big games with 30, 35 fantasy points and other games with just 2 or 3. And so, that's a great upside. Again, I'm not trying to say he's a bad player. I just don't know if I see the Tyreek Hill comp where he's a top 5 guy, like some people are saying. And then I do think his floor is very risky. I think he could become the next John Ross, a dart throw wide receiver 5 who, gets his first contract, and then who knows what after that. He did actually injure himself at the combine slightly when running his 40, which is just shades of John Ross, and then he wasn't able to participate in the other drills. So just like spooky stuff and reasons why I think I'm a bit lower on him. But still a very good player with some great upside. A guy who, if you're the type of guy who's big into boom bust players, you're playing best ball, this is going to be a great best ball player for years to come. But just a guy that I would be fading when it comes to this tier. I would much rather have a T. Higgins, Michael Pittman, Justin Jefferson, a guy who I think who will give you a safer floor and potentially higher upside as well.
All right, guys, so this is me back in editing now. That is all for this episode. The top 6 numbers 8 through 13 are done now, and then in the next episode, which should be going live as well today, you're going to see me go through tier 4, which is ranks 14 through 18 as well. So make sure to go check that out. And if you have any comments, opinions, or questions, drop them in the comment section, or you can find me on Twitter at Sawyer_FF. Take care.